with that, let's go ahead and get on into it. So today we are talking about another way of conceiving of identifying chords. Now, we'll talk about the reasons why we have multiple systems to do essentially the same thing. We use lead sheet symbols and Roman numerals kind of in tandem. They have simultaneously different purposes, but often are used together. And we'll see kind of why as we proceed throughout the class. So before we get into the meat of Roman numerals, though, let's go ahead and start off with some review of lead sheet symbols, yesterday's topic. So lead sheet symbols provide us information about the chord and are generally placed above the staff. So let's identify two and let's write two. I'll give you 30 seconds for the first two and I'll give you a minute for the final two. So take a look at this chord, identify its root, identify its quality, and then convert that into a lead sheet symbol. So go ahead and take 30 seconds. And what is this chord's lead sheet symbol? Okay, so by my clock, that was 30 seconds. Go ahead and drop in the chat. What did we get for this? What is the answer as we write it? What is the lead sheet symbol for this? Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it is just a floating A. If we know that A is the root and it's a major chord, our lead sheet symbol for major chords is simply just the note name of the root above the staff. Okay, let's try this one out. What about this one? So we've got a B flat as the root here. So it's going to be a B flat chord of some kind. What is the quality of this and what is its lead sheet symbol? So take 30 seconds. What is this second chord? Okay, so there's a question in the chat I'll return to in just a second. So for this one, we have a B flat as the root of this chord. It's going to be a B flat chord of some kind. What is the lead sheet symbol for this chord? Okay, I see some responses in. Do we agree? Do we disagree? So B flat plus is the same as saying B flat augmented. We have a major third between B flat and D and an augmented fifth between B flat and F sharp. Now, there was a question in the chat as to, is it okay if I write the lead sheet symbol essentially a different way? Instead of a floating A, can I write A, M, A, J for major? Or instead of B flat, doing B flat, A, U, G for augmented or something like that. I'm going to go ahead and say that that is inherently fine. All that I ask is that you're consistent. So if you have never used lead sheet symbols before, if you're a complete novice to music, if you've X, Y, Z, for whatever reason, go ahead and stick to what we have here. It'll keep things simple. If you have another system in mind, for instance, A capital M or A, M, A, J, we had that slide on yesterday's lecture of a bunch of different possibilities. As long as you are consistent and it's clear what you mean to your TAs, I'm okay with that. So that is okay. Okay, now let's go ahead and write out some chords. So now I have given you treble clef and F minor. So write out the three notes you will need to create an F minor chord from that lead sheet symbol. Take a minute for this one since we're building. We might need some more time. Okay, so that was about a minute. So after a minute, we know we're going to have an F. That's a third of the chord is done for us already. What are the three pitches from bottom to top that we need for an F minor chord? What do we got? Okay, okay, okay. Yes, excellent job. F, A flat, and C. F up to A flat is a minor third, and F up to C is a perfect fifth. It is the same as 1, 3, 5 in a minor scale. That is a minor chord. Great. What does D lowercase o mean? What does the lowercase o mean as a lead sheet symbol? Just go ahead and type it in the chat. Yes, in fact, yes, great. It is a diminished triad. So write out a D diminished triad. Take a minute for this one as well. Okay, what are the three notes we need from bottom to top in a D diminished chord? Okay. I see D, F, and A flat. Same answers, different answers? Ah, okay, there it is. There's the flood. Yes, indeed. D, up a minor third is F natural. So D and F natural. D up to A flat is a diminished fifth. If it were an A natural, that would be the fifth we have in a major or a minor scale. But we've lowered that a half step to give us a diminished fifth. Very, very nice. Okay, so we are as I said, we will continue to see lead sheet symbols a little bit today. I think lead sheet symbols in general are super great because of how simple and straightforward they are. Even when I look at like incredibly complicated music in, say, a Western art tradition that is designed to be kind of looked at from a Roman numeral perspective, I always have in mind the lead sheet symbols. So lead sheet symbols are incredibly useful, and they're a little bit more straightforward than what we're going to talk about today, which is Roman numerals and the diatonic system. So we talked about this briefly on Monday, and it came up just a little bit yesterday, but let's go ahead and review. So what is the diatonic system? The diatonic system is essentially a way of generating triads from the scale degrees of a major or minor scale. There are 7 unique notes in a major or a minor scale. Dia is 7, tonic is tones, 7 tones, diatonic. That is why we call it the diatonic system. So we've looked at major diatonic already. You may remember this. And if you're taking notes, I would keep track of this pattern here. Basically, if we take a B flat major scale, B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G, A, B flat, and if we just flesh out a third and a fifth and just have it be in the key, we get a pattern of chords with particular qualities. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, and then we're back at the octave again. We're back to major. So this is a pattern to commit to memory. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. There's not really a mnemonic for that because it's all just M's, but I kind of add a little bit of a sing-songy pattern to it that kind of helps. And the reason why this is useful is because knowing lead sheets and our diatonic systems unlock the use of Roman numerals for analysis. So in any major key, if you build a chord on the third scale degree, you're going to get a minor chord every time. That's what's useful about our scales. We looked at this with the patterns of whole steps and half steps already, where a scale is going to be the same pattern regardless of what its starting note is. The same is true for the chords you build from the scale, which is why we can have music in different keys that all sounds as if it's made of the same elements, the same basic building blocks, the same chords. So what are Roman numerals? most students usually know Roman numerals, but some students actually don't know what Roman numerals are. I'm sure you've all seen them before, even if you don't necessarily know what they mean by Roman numerals. A system of writing numbers. It comes from the ancient Romans. So in music, we use both capital and lowercase Roman numerals. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Capital letters use, if you think of the Times New Roman text, which is what this is written in, it's kind of like a capital I with the 2 lines. I, V, because V stands for 5, 1 before 5, 5 plus 1 is 6, and 5 plus 2 is 7. And then after that, we're back to 1 again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then if you do lowercase, you just use lowercase i's and v's, and so on. So Roman numerals as a system are more complicated than this, but musicians only use these 7, the first 7 Roman numerals. So pretty straightforward, thankfully. Not too bad for us, even if you haven't used Roman numerals before. Just remember that I is 1 and V is 5, and everything else is related to those 2 systems. So why do we use these? You may be wondering, well, if we have lead sheet symbols, why do we use these? We use Roman numerals to identify chords in a diatonic system. So the lead sheet symbols we have are just free of context. If we have an F major chord, it's an F major chord. However, in music, an F major chord means a very different thing if it's the 5 chord in B flat or if it's the 1 chord in F major. And the reason why we'll talk about a little bit later, but capital Roman numerals are used for major chords and lowercase Roman numerals are used for minor chords. So if you see a lowercase I, that means it's the 1 chord and it's minor. You're dealing with a minor key. If you see a capital 4, that means that it is a major key, or pardon me, it's a major scale built on the 4th note of that key, and so on. So for diminished and augmented chords, we use the same symbols here, but we also then add the same symbols from the lead sheets, a lowercase o for diminished and a plus sign for augmented. So this is where the question in the chat earlier about can I use different symbols comes into play a bit. For Roman numerals, this is fixed. You do not write lowercase 2 dim. That is not a thing. We use lowercase 2 with an o to show diminished. We would do, uppercase 5 with the plus to show augmented, and so on. So we can think of minor chords with an O as being like a minor chord where we've lowered the 5th to make it diminished. So you'll always see a lowercase Roman numeral if you're going to have a diminished chord. And the opposite is true for augmented chords. You'll always see an uppercase Roman numeral with the plus sign if it's augmented, and so on. We'll actually talk about where you would see Roman numerals with augmented or diminished chords specifically, because there's actually a relatively limited places that you'll see these types of chords. Anything that's hypothetically possible, but convention dictates a couple different trends. So any questions on the Roman numeral system, the basics? We haven't applied this to any music yet. We've just talked about it conceptually, but does that make sense? Uppercase and lowercase and when we use certain symbols. Any questions? Great. Awesome. I appreciate the thumbs up. Awesome. Great. Thank you. Okay, let's move on then. Let's talk about major. So we will talk about major. We talked about major briefly already. We'll do a whole section on major, and then we will kind of pivot again to minor. As you may expect by now, major and minor systems are related, but generally speaking, distinct. So here's what we just looked at. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. And then you're at major again. So in B flat major, we can think of this as a capital 1, a lowercase 2, a lowercase 3, a capital 4, a capital 5, a lowercase 6, a lowercase 7 with a lowercase o to show that it's diminished. Sometimes the o is put in the superscript, but it just depends. It doesn't really matter. And then a capital 1 again. That shows major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, and so on. So when I say that in any major key, the 3 chord, if there's no accidentals, is a minor 3, well, then there you go. This is transmutable. It doesn't matter what key we're in. This Roman numeral pattern is true for the diatonic chords. Now, whenever we add accidentals to the picture, it's generally seen as outside of the diatonic system. But when we get into minor, we'll talk about how that gets tricky. So this is the system of chords for every major scale. The 1 chord in a major key is always major. The 3 chord in a major key is always minor. The 7 diminished chord in a major key is always diminished, and so on and so on and so on. So this is useful for a variety of reasons. It's useful because it allows our ear to give music direction and purpose. So even if we're thinking in terms of lead sheets, chords are usually arranged in a way that gives them forward motion. We don't just have chords picked at random. Chords usually go from one place to another. And by relating every major key to this allows us to think of every key in a similar way, and also allows us to transition between keys and still keep a sense of forward motion and forward pulse. Music would be boring if it was always in the same key. So you often see key changes between big sections of music. We're not going to look at that specifically today, but that's part of the reason why we have this system. Roman numerals usually go below the staff. So this is what I mean when I say that we can use lead sheet symbols and Roman numerals. Lead sheet symbols usually go above the staff, and Roman numerals almost always go below the staff. So you can actually think of using both as you go through. And as we'll see when we begin identifying and writing, you can actually use lead sheet symbols as kind of a step along the way to your Roman numerals. So they're actually kind of handy. That's why we're doing Roman numerals second. So identifying major diatonic chords. So let's try a common task in looking at a piece of music. Identifying the Roman numeral of a chord in relation to its key. So let's do this step by step. So here's the process. Say we have D major, 2 sharps, D major. We have a G major chord. You'd identify the root as G. You'd identify the quality as major. You could use lead sheet symbols to assist you. So notice I put the floating G as a lead sheet symbol. You can relate where G falls in relation to a scale degree. In the key of D major, 1, 2, 3, 4. G is the 4th note in D major. And you write your Roman numeral and make any required changes. If it's diatonic, if it has no accidentals, then you just can remember the pattern from before, or just go, well, it's 4, so I need a Roman numeral. It's major, so it's capital. It's relatively straightforward. The problem with this is that it's an extra step from lead sheets. And in practice, music is often way more complicated than this example in a vacuum. But the nuts and bolts are actually that straightforward. We basically just figure out what the lead sheet symbol is, and then relate it to a scale degree and convert that to a Roman numeral. Not too bad. Any questions on this process? Now's a good time to ask, because we're about to do some practice of this. Shoot me a thumbs up if we're good to go. Using the perks of Zoom to our advantage. Okay, I see 1 thumbs up. That's a good enough for me. Let's go ahead and move on then. Let's do some practicing. So here we are. How do you determine the root? That is a great question, Donovan. We'll actually talk about that in a lot more detail tomorrow. Let's go back just a quick sec. In our case, for today only, the note on the bottom is going to be the root. Now, the entirety of tomorrow's class is about what happens when the root isn't in the bottom. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. For right now, let's just keep it a little bit more streamlined. For our purposes, if the note is on the bottom, that's the root. As a spoiler alert for tomorrow, I have a cute little mnemonic. Root position chords are what I call snowman form, because it looks like a little bit of a snowman. Boom, boom, boom. I'm in fact from Chicago, so snow is a thing that I'm used to, but it looks like a snowman. But we'll talk more about that tomorrow. That's a great question, though. Okay, other questions before we do some practice? Okay. This shouldn't hopefully take too long. Let's just take 30 seconds. Let's see how we do. So 30 seconds, look at your key, and I'm telling you it's major, so you know that it's major. Identify the key, identify the chord, the root and the quality, and then convert all that information into a Roman numeral. So take 30 seconds. Let me know if you need more time. Okay, do we need more time? You can just put a Y or an N in the chat. Yes, okay, sure. Sure, no problem. Take another 30 seconds. Okay, let's call it there for now. I'll talk through this first one. So, as we've seen, and will continue to see, there are a bunch of ways that your process to identify this chord can vary. So, what I mean is, we have an F chord, or an F scale, that is. So we know that it's the key of F because we just have memorized that one flat is F major. That's kind of the exception that breaks the rule. So we know it's F. Now, we can either go, I'm going to identify this chord as a standalone object and then think of the scale degree and then write the Roman numeral that way. Or you can go, I'm going to figure out the scale degree and remember what the chord quality for that scale degree is. Either way is fine, because as long as there's no accidentals, you will get the right answer. So let me talk through this, the kind of standalone object way first. So we have D as the root. D up to F natural is a minor third. So it's going to be minor or diminished. D up to A is a perfect fifth. Well, a minor third and a perfect fifth give us a minor chord. If this is a minor chord, then that means we're going to use a lowercase Roman numeral. So we can put a D lowercase m on top if we want as a lead sheet symbol. What is D in the key of F? F, G, A, B flat, C, D. So this is a lowercase 6 for our Roman numeral. 6 is V, I, looks like that. And we could relate this back to our scale. Now, depending on your comfort level, you can either think of the scale degrees in your head, or you can just write out the scale as practice. That is a slower way. And if you are eventually going to be a music major or minor or a performer, you'll eventually not want to do that. But for right now, if you want to always just kind of write out the scale as a reference for you, that's totally fine. The benefits of being online and having most of your assignments be take home is that, well, all of your assignments be take home, is that you can have scratch paper and just work on that stuff too as much as you need. So do we all see how I got there? Any questions on how I got 6 for this? A lowercase Roman numeral 6. This is the 6th chord in F minor. Now, I haven't talked about, all these chords actually have other names. For instance, we would call this chord the submediant chord if this were a music theory classroom. I'm not going to belabor you with that. We'll talk a little bit about some of those names next week, but for our purposes, we can just call this the 6th chord in F minor. Okay, try this one out. Try this one out. Take a minute if you haven't already started. We know it's a major key, so identify your key, identify your chord quality, identify your scale degree, and write the Roman numeral. So take a minute. Okay, would we like more time? Type Y or N? N for no, let's move on. Y for yes. Some extra time, please. Cool. I see no's first. And again, if you feel more comfortable private messaging me, that's also fine. I'm happy to do that. Okay, instead of talking this one through, I'm going to reveal it and then talk about it. Here we go. Oh, I see a yes. Okay, we'll tell you what. I'm going to go ahead and reveal it, and then we'll talk through it. And then if you have any questions after that, just let me know. Okay, here we go. So it's a diminished 7 chord. Now, how did we get there? Well, we know it's E major. 1, 2, 3, 4 sharps. D sharp's the last sharp. Up a half step is E, E major. Now, we can go, okay, well, D sharp is the 7th scale degree of E major. So we can go, well, I remember that the seventh chord in E major or in any major key is going to be diminished. That's one way you can get there. You can also go, well, D sharp up to F sharp is a minor third in an unusual minor third, but a minor third. And D sharp up to A natural is a diminished 5th. Well, a minor third and diminished 5th gives us a diminished chord. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 gives us D sharp. That's a lowercase Roman numeral with our O next to it. 7 diminished. Any questions on how I got there? Does that make sense? I'm going to take silence as affirmation for right now, but feel free to stop me. Okay, here we go. Now let's write a couple. Let's write 2 of these. Let's try it out. Identify this major key signature and write a minor chord on scale degree 2. Here's your key signature, minor chord on scale degree 2, and I've given you treble clefs. Write it in treble clef. Go ahead. Let's take 2 full minutes for this one, just in case we need the time. 2 full minutes. Okay. So what is the root? Actually, tell you what, let's do this. What is the lead sheet symbol of the chord we're going to need? Give me a root and a quality. It's the 2 chord in E flat major. What is the root and the quality of the chord that we'll need? Let's try to synthesize a couple different processes here. Yes, excellent work. Yes, indeed. We have an F minor chord. Now, there's a couple ways you can get here. You can go, well, it tells me that 2 chord is minor. It tells me that it's 2. If I figure out the 2nd scale degree, I can just build a chord over it and it's going to be minor because that's how it is in the scale. If you're not comfortable with that, you can go, well, I know it starts on F. I need a minor chord. Let's go ahead. F up to A flat is a minor third. F up to C is a perfect 5th. That's a minor chord. Either way, doesn't really matter. We have E flat major, 1, 2. There's F. So any questions on that? let's go ahead and do another one now. So we have this key signature and a 5 chord. Give me the 5 chord and whatever this major key signature is. Take another 2 minutes for this one as well. Okay, just like before, I'm going to reveal the answer for this one and then talk through it. So here we go. Boom. F sharp major chord. We're in the key of B. A sharp up a half step is B. This is B major. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up from B is F sharp, not F natural, F sharp. If we build the chord diatonically, we'll get our 3 required notes, F sharp, A sharp, and C sharp, or we could build it manually and go F sharp up a minor, up a major third is A sharp, F sharp up a perfect fifth is C sharp. That's how we get a major 5 chord. Major 5 chord. Any questions on that or any wildly different answers? No, not generally. If you were to do it up an octave and use ledger lines, that's totally fine. Doesn't matter. As long as you have the right pitches, that's totally fine. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my ranges are arbitrary. I usually just look for whatever gives us the least amount of ledger lines, but it doesn't really matter. So good question. Other questions? Okay, let's move on. So let's look at Roman numerals in context. We're going to take what we just did and explode it a little bit, and you'll see what I mean. So here is a poor attempt at music making, but a perfect attempt at creating an exercise for us. So here is a group of chords. These chords logically follow one another. This is called a chord progression. We will have entire days devoted to chord progressions next week. But for right now, here's a chord progression. This is not what actual music would look like for reasons that we'll get into tomorrow and into the future. But here are diatonic chords in this key. What is this key? 2 flats major. Type it in the chat. Hopefully we're getting a bit quick at this, but it's okay if you listen to the root 10. Indeed, B flat major. This is B flat major. So 2 flats, the second to last flat is B flat major. Now, this is a logical chord progression. This could be perhaps a reduction of an actual piece of music, and we've just reduced it down to its simplest chords in the order that they appear. So think back to your scale. I've written out the B flat major scale for you. 2 flats, B flat and E flat. There's your scale. Let's go ahead and try this now. We're going to go kind of Mach 5 here from what we just did, but you know, 'tis the nature of summer courses, I'm afraid. try identifying the first three chords, knowing that we're working in B flat major and having the scale related to you. You can either think of your pattern of major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, or you can go, I know what the roots are, I'll relate them to their scale degrees, and then I'll identify the qualities manually. Either way is fine. Take 2 minutes, try the first three chords out. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and reveal these first three chords. Here we go. So we start off on a 1 chord, B flat's the root. We have a B flat chord, 1, 3, 5, B flat major, capital 1. We then go up to E flat. E flat is the root. E flat up to G is a major third. E flat up to B flat is a perfect fifth, major chord. Same thing happens with 5, another major chord. Now, you could, something I'm trying to illustrate that we don't necessarily have to do right away, but if you know that your chord has the root in the bottom and is in this kind of closed position, you've either extracted that from music or it's just written that way in the music. If there's no accidentals, if it's diatonic, it's going to be consistent. If you know that the 4 chord is major and the 4 is the root, well, then you can just assume it's going to be a capital 4 in any case. So did we get any major differences from this answer here? 1, 4, 5. Okay. If not, then let's go ahead and try the last 4 chords. So let's also take 2 minutes for this. Look for patterns for this last chord here as a hint. 2 minutes, do these last 4 chords as well. Okay, so instead of going part by part in order to just move on, I'll go ahead and talk through these very briefly. So we have G as the root. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is a 6 chord. We could memorize the pattern and go, well, it's going to be minor. This is a minor chord. We could also go G up to B flat, minor third, G up to D, perfect fifth. C chord, the second scale degree. C up to E flat is a minor third, C up to G is a perfect fifth, minor chord, a minor 2. We have F, A, C. Well, we already saw F, A, C in the exact same configuration. It's a 5 chord. And if we look at B flat, D, and F, we already saw B flat, D, and F, but just down an octave. So that is in fact a 1 chord. So here's your pattern: 1, 4, 5, 6, 2, 5, 1. A completely logical chord progression. If you were to play this chord progression on a keyboard or a guitar or whatever instrument you have, this would make some logical musical sense for reasons we'll talk about in the future. Any questions on this process? This may have been too quick. This may have been too slow. There's a variety of possibilities to that, but do we at least understand the process for this? We'll have more time to practice, of course. I see a confident yes. I appreciate that. It's okay if you don't. That's totally fine. We'll also do this again for minor today too, so we'll have some more practice in minor as well. Okay, speaking of which, let's go ahead and move on then. Minor. Now, at this point, you may be suspecting that minor is going to be trickier than major because that's how scales were, that's how key signatures were. If that's your instinct, you'd be right. We haven't looked at the minor diatonic system yet, which has different chords than the major system. It's a different pattern. So we could memorize the pattern, or we could note that just like relative scales, relative diatonic systems have the same chords. If you look at the relative major, which is the 3 chord in this case, if we have B flat minor, D flat major is the relative minor, major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, and then so on. So that's a way to kind of, again, learn one pattern and use it for 2 different processes. So either way, chords work the same way as relative scales. So that's handy for us. The problem with minor is associated accidentals. So I did make a supplemental video on the types of minor scales. If you did watch that, which I highly recommend if you were particularly a music major or a minor, specifically scale degree 7, what we would call the harmonic minor scale, creates some problems for us. If we think of all of the chords that are affected by raising scale degree 7 is A natural. A flat up a half step becomes A natural. Scale degree 7 is raised. That gives us 3 new chords. The 3 chord has an A in it, the 5 chord has an A in it, and the 7 chord has an A in it. Those are the 3 chords that have A's in them. That gives us 3 new chord qualities. If we raise up the top note of 3, we get an augmented chord. That's where augmented chords can happen in diatonic systems. If we raise up A natural in F, or pardon me, in an F minor chord, we get an F major chord. We get a capital 5. If we raise up A natural in an A flat major chord, we suddenly get an A diminished chord. We've actually changed the root in this case. So that's a bit tricky business. We're actually raising the root. Now, these are so common as to be usually lumped in with the diatonic system, although as you see, you'll see accidentals with these. 3 augmented isn't particularly common, but capital 5, major 5, and diminished 7 are actually quite common in minor key pieces. So we will see them a lot. I would actually say that we will see major 5 more than we see minor 5. Now, for us, all we have to go is, well, if 5 is the root of the chord, but we've changed it from a minor chord to a major chord, we just changed the Roman numeral from a lowercase to an uppercase. It's a relatively straightforward change. 3 and 7 are a bit more complicated, but luckily we see them less than we see 5. So minor. We could belabor minor and do tons and tons and tons of practice on minor, but I don't want to kind of overwhelm us. I kind of want to keep it as broad strokes as possible. Do we understand the general gist of how minor relates to major, how we get here? We could think of our relative major for our chord qualities, and then think of what happens when we raise scale degree 7 as to why we have these 3 chords here. If you recall, associated accidentals also involve scale degree 6. We don't really see scale degree 6 raised in chords that much. It's primarily something you see in just like melodies. Minor scales all have the same pattern for Roman numerals. Yes, that is true, Donovan. Yes. So this pattern of minor, diminished, major, minor, minor, major, major is the same for every minor scale. You could either memorize that as its own pattern of minor, or like I said, you could think of what the relative major pattern would be and then just change the numbers on the Roman numeral to reflect your new tonic pitch. But yes, any minor key is going to have the same qualities for its Roman numerals. So just for the class in general, does that make sense? Do we need more explanation? Type of Y and N in chat, yes or no? Yes, we can move on. No, we need a little bit, we need some help. I see a yes. It's a good sign so far. I see a Y. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and now do what we just did for major and do the same thing now, but for identifying minor chords. So identifying minor chords. It's the same process as major. Minor as a system is more complicated because of our associated accidentals, but the identification process is identical. So that's good for us. Same thing as before. Here's the chord. We identify the minor key. We have 4 flats. That's F minor. We could think of what is A flat major's relative minor, or we can go, I know that F has 1 flat. We've added 3 flats to it, F minor. Either way, F minor. Identify the root. The root of this chord is C. Identify the quality. C up to E natural is a major third. C up to G natural is a perfect fifth. This is a major chord. Well, look at that. We have our lead sheet symbol, a floating C. This is a major chord. We know that E natural is there because the 7th scale degree of F, which is E, is typically raised in minor. That happens a lot. Think of the root. Well, if C is the root, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. C, the 5th scale degree of F minor. Therefore, this is a capital 5. So because we have an accidental, we have to change the quality from its defaulted lowercase 5 to a capital 5. So if you're typing, it just looks like a bigger 5. If you're actually writing this out, you can do a V with 2 horizontal slashes over it to distinguish from a lowercase, which is just a lowercase v. So either way. So does this process make sense? It's the exact same process we just saw, but we just have to make sure that we're keeping track of minor, because minor is always kind of trickier. Let's do some practice. So we'll practice writing and identifying a few chords. Here we go. Starting off, I'm going to talk through this one, and then I'll have the second one be your turn. 1 sharp minor. However you get there, there's a variety of paths. We know that 1 sharp minor is E minor. Well, we can go E, F sharp, G, A, gives us scale degree 4. It's going to be a 4 chord of some kind. A is the root of this chord. We can think of A up to C natural is a minor third. A up to E natural is a perfect fifth. This is an A minor chord. We know that A is the 4th degree in E minor. Therefore, we can just do a lowercase 4 for our answer. Lowercase I, lowercase v, 4. This is the 4 chord in E minor. Does that make sense? Just shoot me thumbs up as the reaction or in the chat, either way. And I hope it does, because we're going to do some practice right now, but it's okay if it doesn't. Okay, try it now for yourself. So identify the scale, identify the key. I'm telling you it's minor. As we've seen before, sometimes it's hard to tell whether it's major or minor just from the key signature alone, but take it on faith right now that this is minor. This is a minor key. Go ahead and take a minute, figure out the minor key, figure out the chord quality, figure out the Roman numeral, okay? Try it out. Okay, would we like some more time? Yes or no? I'm not seeing any responses. I'm going to go ahead and assume that we can go ahead and talk about this. I'll reveal the answer and talk through it. So here we go. 2 diminished. How the heck did I get 2 diminished? Well, 3 sharps is F sharp minor. We can think of F sharp major as 6 sharps. And if we remove 3, we get F sharp minor. Or we can go A major is this key signature and F sharp is A's relative minor. Either way, we get F sharp minor. We know that we have a G sharp here. F sharp, G sharp. We can look at the chord. G sharp up to B is a minor third. G sharp up to D natural is a diminished fifth. Well, a minor third and diminished fifth gives us a diminished chord. So we do a lowercase 2 and then add our lowercase o next to it to show that it's diminished. G sharp, it's a 2 chord, it's diminished. Any questions on that? Minor is a bit tricky, as we've seen. I wouldn't say it's harder or easier. It's just, it has a, relating things back to major always creates kind of new sets of problems to deal with. So let's go ahead and try this now. Let's try writing this chord. Take 2 minutes, write this chord out. This is a 3 chord. It's a major chord. It's going to be in whatever minor key this is. I see the question. How is it diminished? No problem. So G sharp up to B. G sharp up to B is a minor third. So G sharp is tricky because it's hard to relate back to a major scale for G sharp because there really isn't G sharp major. We can go, well, I know that G natural up to B is a major third. And if we raise up the bottom note, we've made that interval smaller. So that's one way to think about it. We can also go G sharp up to D. Well, we know that G up to D is a perfect fifth, and we've raised that up and made it smaller. That makes it a diminished fifth. We could also perhaps at some point memorize, well, the 2 chord in minor is typically diminished. We could think of our relative major or just have the pattern for minor memorized. That's a really circuitous answer, and I do apologize, but there's just so many different ways that we can think of these systems because all of them are kind of interrelated. So the 2 chord in minor is usually a diminished chord. If we look at the intervals, we'll see that it's a diminished chord on its own in a vacuum. If we look at it in context of the system, it's a diminished chord through our regular pattern. Hopefully that helps. We'll have some more and more practice with this as we go though too. So hopefully this will get a little bit more familiar. Okay, so try this out. 3 chord, it's a major 3 chord in this minor key signature. Try it out. Okay, let me talk through the answer here. 1 flat, however you get there, is D as in dog minor, D minor. We can think of our D minor scale, and we find that the third note of D minor is F natural. We have a major chord built on F natural. We can just build it from scratch. F up to A is a major third, F up to C is a perfect fifth, or we can think of just building the chord on our notes in D minor. And that looks like this. If we take the F, the A, and the C from D minor, we get a major chord here. So that is how we got there. This one is trickier. Remember the hiccup with the 7 diminished chord. Take 2 minutes and try this one out, and then we'll regroup and talk about it. Okay. Let me ask, first of all, what is the tonic of this scale? What minor scale is this? I just need a letter name, a note name. Indeed, C minor. Okay, great. What is the root of this chord? We see the quality. What's the root? If it's the 7th note in C minor, what's the root? Great question. Indeed, this is kind of a trick question. It should be B flat, but because it's diminished, we know that it's been raised. B natural is the root of this chord. And then from there, B natural, and then D and F. This is the tricky one. Like I said, 5 and 7 in particular can often get tricky because we often will raise scale degree 7 in these chords. So that's tricky. If I asked you for capital 7, a major 7 chord, that would be B flat, D and F. But because it's diminished, we know that we've raised the root for a variety of reasons. So that is tricky. And I will fully acknowledge that this is a quirk of minor scales that are not always the most intuitive. Do we all understand that? Shoot me a thumbs up if we're all good to go, or type some sort of question or comment of despair into the chat. It is tricky. I will fully acknowledge that. Question mark. Yeah, so the problem is the chord that we have that naturally occurs in a minor system is major. It's a B flat chord, B flat, D, and F. It's built from our diatonic pitches, which should be B flat. However, because we often will raise scale degree 7 in minor for a variety of reasons that will really come into kind of concentration next week, we often will see that we raise scale degree 7. What that means for the 7 chord is that if we raise up B natural or B flat up to B natural, we've now changed the root. We have raised the root from B flat to B natural. And the ramifications of that make this a diminished chord instead of a major chord. B natural up to D is a minor third. B natural up to F is a diminished fifth, a diminished chord. This is something that we often see in minor. The reasons for that are purely conventional, purely historical. There is no inherent reason why we do this. It's just something that has been developed over hundreds of years of music theory and composition and practice. So hopefully that clarified things a little bit more. If this is still a little sketchy, that is okay. There are other opportunities we'll have to practice this. How do we know which minor chords often have associated accidentals? That's a great question, Jane. The short answer pertains to this slide. 3, 5, 7. That's it. 3, 5, and 7 are the chords that are affected. If you see accidentals, and that accidental is scale degree 7, so in this case, A's and B flat minor, you ding, 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 like alarm bells should be going off that it might be a 3, a 5, or a 7 chord. It is only going to be these options, generally speaking, for minor. Now, in practice, music is extremely slippery. Composers do whatever they want. But for our purposes of keeping kind of restraints on this to kind of give us some focus, for our purposes right now, if we see 3, 5, or 7, we're going to see those in any minor scale, for instance. 3 augmented is quite rare, but major 5 and diminished 7th happen all the time. I cannot overemphasize how often major 5 happens in particular, for reasons we'll talk about in the future. For which minor scales? Yeah, it happens for any minor scale. It doesn't matter. Any minor scale. Scale degree 7 often gets raised in any minor scale. It's purely conventional. Yeah. So let's go ahead and, so I have another chord progression. I'm going to ask the class as a question. I have 7 chords here to identify. Do you want to do them as a class, or would you like me to skip this slide and practice it on your own and check the answers later? I'll post the slides, of course. The animations reveal the answers. That is entirely up to you. As a class, okay? Great, let's do it. Let's do it. Here we go. What is this key? What is this minor key signature? I see skip. Oh, actually, I see some dissent. I need one more vote so we can decide. I see 1 vote for as a class, 1 vote for skip and practice. What would we like to do? I see another vote for as a class. Okay, let's do this as a class. Here we go. What is this minor key signature? 2 sharps minor. I see B minor. I see B minor. I see B minor. There seems to be some consensus. Cut to the chase. It is, in fact, B minor. B major has 5 sharps. If we remove 3 of them, we get minor. Or you could go, well, I know that this is the D major key signature. D major's relative minor is B. So either way you get there. Okay. Here's your scale. B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B. Try these chords first. 2 minutes. Try these first 3 chords out. No accidentals, so we're all good to go. You can just look at your scale, look at your scale degrees, look at your chord qualities, and add your Roman numerals. So 2 minutes, try this out. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and reveal the first three answers and then talk through them. So right off the bat, we have B as the root. We know that's going to be a 1 chord. B up to D is minor. B up to F sharp is perfect. Minor chord. It's a 1. It's a lowercase I. We have an A chord here. We have A natural. So there's no cause for alarm because we haven't raised it. There's no worry about futzing with the associated accidentals. So we have A up to C sharp. That's a major third. And A up to E natural. That's a perfect fifth. Therefore, this is going to be an A major chord. A is scale degree 7, capital 7. This is different than if we had raised A up to A sharp, because then that would change the chord entirely. So this is not what we had on the previous screen. This is a major 7 chord. It's been unaltered by the associated accidentals. We now have D. D up to F sharp is major. D up to A is perfect. This is a major chord on the scale degree 3. Therefore, this is a capital I 3. Minor, major, major. For the sake of time, I'm going to talk through these. So try to follow along and let me know if you have any questions. Please stop me. I beg you to stop me if you would like me to. So we have a G chord. We know that G is scale degree 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. G up to B is a major third. G up to D is a perfect fifth, another major chord. So this is a capital, capital VI for 6. Here we have C sharp. Well, C sharp is 2. We've seen 2 already. 2's tricky. C sharp up to E is a minor third. C sharp up to D, up to G, beg your pardon, is a diminished fifth. This is a 2, lowercase 2, diminished. I, O. We have an associated accidental here. We've got scale degree 5. So this is going to be probably a major 5 chord. F sharp up to A sharp is a major third. F sharp up to C sharp is a perfect fifth. This is a capital V. And we end with B, D, and F sharp, the same chord we had before, but up an octave. Oh, pardon me. So sorry, giving us a 1 chord. 1, 7, 3, 6, 2 diminished, major 5, 1. Now, that is, I'm sure, quicker, me just talking through it, than if you sat down and tried to do it all by hand. I acknowledge that. My question is does that process make sense conceptually more than when we began it about a half hour ago? Give me a Y or an N for yes or no in the chat. Now, this is probably still going to be a bit of a shaky process. This is a lot of information all at once, and I totally acknowledge that. I think that from what I've been seeing from our interaction so far, that as a class, we're doing pretty well so far. We'll have more time to practice this tomorrow, and we'll also continue to have section on Friday. Section will be a great place to bring up these questions to your TAs if they already don't bring them up apropos of nothing. So, Roman numerals. Let's bring it all together and talk about some summary. So at this point, we have 2 different processes for identifying chords: lead sheet symbols and Roman numerals. We've talked a little bit about why we'd use one over the other, but let's go ahead and dig into that a little more. In general, lead sheet symbols are easier for performance as they give a clearer sense of the chordal information for the musicians. If I see a capital C and a lowercase m, I know I need to play a C minor chord. Done. Easy for performance. The lead sheets we looked at yesterday are all, with the sole exception of arguably the rock tune, are all tools of performance. We see the chords, we play the chords straightforward. Roman numerals are not necessarily for that purpose. They can be, but not typically. Roman numerals are used to relate how chords, or pardon me, are useful for looking at how chords relate in a key. In a good portion of Western music, chords and scales are hierarchical. So chords have function that reinforce what we call tonality. And Roman numerals show this by relating everything back to the tonic key. In a tonal system, in tonality, in a diatonic system, these are all synonymous terms. The 1 chord, scale degree 1, the tonic chord, is the very, very top of a pyramid. And as we'll continue to see, especially next week, certain chords like 5 or 4 have different functions that all contribute towards making that one chord sound like the most important chord in a piece of music. This is usually true even when we're working with just lead sheet symbols. These processes are happening, it's just lead sheet symbols don't address them. So this is particularly important in Western art music, but lead sheet symbols are important in really any kind of music. We'll talk next week a bit about how we can use Roman numerals to think about rock progressions, for instance. So for our purposes, we can think of Roman numerals as a tool of analysis, of looking at how chords relate in a key, and lead sheet symbols as a tool for performance, an easier way that performers can just read the chords and play the chords. Both systems are useful, and we can use both systems simultaneously, because as we've seen today, lead sheet symbols can be kind of a step along the way to Roman numeral identification. So that's kind of why we have these two systems, now that we're kind of at the end, the other side of them. So let's talk about next time. We will continue to build on what we're doing. There are no more ways to identify chords. We've looked at all the ways we can talk about chords, lead sheets, Roman numerals. We will keep those systems going through the rest of the quarter. Tomorrow, we're going to start manipulating these chords to kind of probe a question that was asked earlier. Specifically, we're going to change what's on the bottom of the chord, what is on the bottom of the chord, and put the root elsewhere. Every chord we've looked at so far, the root has been in the bottom. This is rarely true for all music. The root is often in many different places because the bass has a bit more of an interesting role to play. So we'll look at how to deal with that. This process is called inversion. When we change what's on the bottom, it's called inverting the chords, inversion. It's just like an extension of our principle of inversion for intervals, which we talked about last week. So after that, into next week, we will continue our investigations into harmony and look at new chord types. What about chords with 4 notes? And chord progressions, basic chord progressions. Now, to be utterly transparent at this point in the quarter, the beginning of the quarter, we have relatively limited information. Here is a rhythm, here is a note, here is maybe a scale. As we go from here on out, we're going to get lots and lots and lots and lots of information. It's okay if you don't grasp all of it, because I'll tell you right now, our assessments are going to be more general and are going to be a little bit more kind of creative and compositional in their kind of process. So that way I don't want to bury you under a mountain of information, but I want to throw a bunch of different things that you may see in the wild out there. So whatever music you're interested in listening to or creating or analyzing for a final paper, perhaps, that you can kind of pick up some things that you want to kind of focus on specifically. So we kind of went from depth in the first half of the quarter to breadth at the end of the quarter. So we've gone from kind of a deep pond to kind of a shallow ocean at the end. So it is okay if we're not totally equipped for everything from here on out. So that is okay. It's more about experiencing different kinds of music and seeing all the possibilities we can have with these different chord types. So that's a bit of my soapbox there. So with that, we went a little long today. We covered a lot of good stuff though, and hopefully we all have a bit of a better idea as to how to do Roman numerals. With that, I'm going to go ahead and release you for the day. So thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate your attendance once again. I will stick around if you have any questions, but with that, I will see all of you tomorrow.